devotees, let me just tell you one little thing. I had a special treatment today, skin treatment, and I'm okay, but I'm not 100%, so we'll see how it goes. I may not do the usual hour and a quarter. Yeah, we'll just see how it goes. And it's a special treatment. I can't use any strong light, like computer light, for a couple of days. So, but anyway, welcome to the 51st day of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar, Srimad Bhagavatam. And yeah, it's just such an amazing program. I was reading this 13th chapter of the first canto just an hour or 2 hours ago for some time. Wow, it's amazing. It is truly amazing. So, okay, let us begin with our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pascha Chadeshatarne Shri Krishna Chaitanya Pramunityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchikalpatarubhyascha kripa sindubhya evacha, patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, devotees, last night we were getting into First Canto, Chapter 13, verses 3 and 4, they're together. And they're biographical. At least the purports are very much biographical. Let me just read the 2 verses again. First Canto, Chapter 13, verses 3 and 4. When they saw Vidura return to the palace, all the inhabitants, Maharaj Yudhisthira, his younger brothers, Dhritarashtra, Satyaki, Sanjay, Kripacharya, Kunti, Gandhari, Draupadi, Subhadra, Uttara, Kripi, many other wives of the Kauravas, and other ladies with children, all hurried to him in great delight. It so appeared that they had regained their consciousness after a long period. Yes. This is when they saw Vidura, having not seen him for I don't even know really how long, but it might be a few years. Anyway, it was definitely quite some time. So the purport consists of 4 biographies, basically. Each biography is about a page or a page and a half even of purport, depending. Or anyway, it's fairly extensive, depending on who is the person. So the people concerned are, as we discussed last night, first of all, Gandhari. Second is Prita, at least that name is used, but we know Prita as Kunti. So, yeah, she's got a page and a half, just biographical information about her. Then there's Draupadi, and she's got a page. And then there's Subhadra, and she's not got so much, maybe half a page or a little more than half a page of purport. Let's just briefly have a look, because this, in terms of Bhakti Vaibhava, to my knowledge, maybe we should even check that, but to my knowledge, biographical things like this may not be so important. Make a note to check that with, I guess, Deva. Yeah, whether they're going to be tested on any biographical notes. Okay, so, yeah, we discussed last night about Gandhari, the wife of Dhritarashtra, who was a great saintly lady, really very extraordinary lady. Now is Prita, or Kunti. So we'll just bring out a few points here and there. So Kunti is directly the sister of Vasudeva, Lord Krishna's father, in Mathura. And she was known as Prita. And therefore we find even in Bhagavad Gita, as I recall, there, I think it's in Bhagavad Gita, in some of Prabhupada's books, there's reference to Arjuna as being the son of Prita. Yeah, so yeah, she is the sister of Vasudeva, and therefore Lord Krishna and Prita's or Kunti's sons, the 5 Pandavas, they're directly first cousins. Somehow or other later she was adopted by a king named Kunti Bhoja at some point later on. And therefore this name Kunti came to her. And like we said, more often than not, in my experience, I think much more often than not, she's actually addressed or referred to as Kunti. And here's an interesting point. She is the incarnation of the success potency of the Lord. That's interesting, isn't it? The success potency. Right. So then there's this whole thing. What a thing. It's the big thing, or it's one of the very big things in regards to Kunti, Prita, that in the palace of her whatever stepfather, whatever you might say, Kunti Bhoja, she would often assist, because many heavenly personalities from higher planets and sages and so on would come and visit Kunti Bhoja's palace, and she was engaged in serving them. And one time she served Devasa Muni, very extraordinary person, but she served him very nicely. And he gave her a blessing, which at the time she was too young to really understand what it meant. But Devasa Muni gave her a mantra by which she could call for any demigod she wanted. And she just took it like, just call for them, and then, oh, look, it's such and such. Okay, thank you. See you later. Just call for them. But actually what he meant was call for a particular demigod, to have a child by that demigod, but she didn't understand that. And it may well be that Durvasa didn't explain that at all. Because she was very young. So she did, just right away pretty much. She called for the sun god, and he came, and he just wanted to give her a child, but she didn't understand that, and so she sort of panicked and refused. But then the sun god said that it's okay, if we do this, you will remain a virgin for the future. So she agreed, and as a result, Karna was born. Karna. So Kunti has 6 children, not just the 5 Pandavas, but Karna is the oldest, the senior. But then she kept that hidden. Somehow or other, she kept her pregnancy hidden, and when Karna was born, she sort of disposed of him. Yes. And what did she do? She put him on a river, a basket or something, and on the river. And he was picked up by a chariot driver, Sudra, from either the same court or one of the just nearby connected royal families, or maybe the very royal family that she was in there. But they didn't, the only one who knew was her. This couple, they thought they were childless, and they found this child floating down the river, and they thought, this is just our lucky day. We just got a child. So they adopted him. And I think the wife's name was Radha, and so he was known as Radheya. Have I got it? You don't know? Okay. Anyway, it's something like that. Yeah. But when, for example, Draupadi was having her Swayamvara to choose a husband, Karna wanted to take part because he was built like a Kshatriya and he'd been through training like a Kshatriya. But by upbringing, by family, the known family, he was a Sudra, because chariot drivers are Sudras. So when it came to the competition, I think it was either Draupadi, I think Draupadi herself knew that he's a Sudra. And so she said, no, he can't take part. Can't take part, because otherwise he might well have won. Because he was really super powerful. He's the son of the sun god. He's superhuman. So anyway, then she married Pandu. Kunti married Pandu. And Pandu didn't want to have children. He wanted to leave the family, and Prabhupada says, adopt the renounced order of life. And Kunti didn't like this because she wanted children. So then there was an agreement that she could call demigods to have children. So she called, who did she call? She called Yamaraj, who fathered Yudhisthira. Then who is it? Yamaraj for Yudhisthira, Vayu for Bhima, Indra for Arjuna, and Nakula and Sahadev, they are begotten by Pandu himself in the womb of Madri, who was the second wife. There were two wives. And when Pandu died young and was being cremated, then it was a question, who would they both, or would one of them perform sati, go into the fire? And it was decided that Madri would, because they're all these 5 young children, so Kunti would stay alive to bring them up. Okay, so then she went with the children into exile, and various things happened in exile. And when Arjuna won Draupadi at that same Swayamvara, then he came back and jokingly said, "Mother, I've brought something special back." And she just didn't even ask, what is it? She said, "Well, whatever it is, just share it with your brothers." So Draupadi became the wife of all 5 Pandavas. Haribol. Okay, then next is Draupadi herself, and she is a partial incarnation of Sachi, the wife of Lord Indra. Her brother's Drishtadyumna, who's famous devotee personality, Kshatriya, who was killed in the battle of Kurukshetra. She gave birth. Each one of the Pandavas fathered a child with her. So Yudhisthira, his son was Pratibit, Bhimasan's son was Sutasoma, Arjuna begot Shrutakirti, Nakula begot Shatanika, and Sahadev begot Shrutakarma. But they were all killed by Ashvatthama at the end of the battle. It was those 5 sons of Draupadi. Yeah. Okay, so then, it all goes on like that. There's the whole incident where Dushasana tries to undress her at the end of the gambling match between Yudhisthira and Shakuni. And he tried to pull off her sari, Dushasana, but Lord Krishna incarnated as an endless sari. And in the end, just after Krishna left this world, in fact, it's coming up in the next, I'm not sure how many chapters, but next couple of chapters, next few chapters, couple of chapters, Lord Krishna leaves this world, and then the Pandavas leave this world. They hand the kingdom over to Parikshit, and off they go. And if you ever come with us to the Himalayas, to Badrinath, then just near Badrinath, it's just 3 kilometers, maybe 4 kilometers away, is this really little settlement called Mana. I mean, it's barely a village. It's not really a village, actually. It's just a few houses. So from there is the path that the Pandavas took into the Himalayas, and one by one they just dropped and went back to Godhead as they're walking. Yeah. And next time we go, we may walk down that path a little way, because there's a waterfall. Not far, just half an hour's walk. You been up there? Never. Kyung. Anyway, it's all right. That means why for the uninitiated. Okay, yeah. So, as with all the others, walking, suddenly, one by one they fell and left this world. Right. Okay, and then there's Subhadra, who is also daughter of Vasudeva, sister of Lord Krishna. From when, Krishna appeared when Vasudeva and Devaki were in prison. And some years later, like 10 years or 11 years later, Krishna killed Kamsa. And then they all moved to Mathura. And to my knowledge, that's when Subhadra was born. Anyway, it was somewhat later, at least it was somewhat later than Krishna. So Subhadra is the daughter of Vasudeva and Devaki. And Prabhupada talks a little bit about the Jagannath deities. Subhadra's there in Puri. And Prabhupada mentions about the meeting of Krishna with the Brijbasis in Kurukshetra. Yeah, and Arjuna married Subhadra. And their son was Abhimanyu, who is the father of Parikshit, the husband of Uttara. But then he was only 16, he was killed in the battle. Yes. So Subhadra. Okay, so verse 5, let's carry on here. We are in the first section, which is verse 1 to verse 16, and the subject matter we're just getting into. Well, we're into it already, as Vidura arrives at the Pandavas' palace. Verses 1 to 16. Okay, so verse 5. So everyone sees Vidura coming in. With great delight, they all approached him, as if life had returned to their bodies. They exchanged obeisances and welcomed each other with embraces. So it's just a very short purport here. Prabhupada makes a very nice point. In the absence of consciousness, the limbs become inactive. Even just when we go to sleep, the limbs become inactive. We're not walking, we're not doing anything generally. But when consciousness returns, the limbs, the senses become active, and we can do, Prabhupada says, existence itself becomes delightful, as long as you're a devotee, that is. So, Vidura, so the same thing happened when Vidura returned. that all the Pandavas, the Kauravas, and all the people, they hadn't seen him for ages. Long absence. But now, and they'd been feeling great separation. So when he returned, it was just like people waking up, more or less. Consciousness returning. Limbs and senses become active and existence itself becomes delightful. So, yeah, they were all feeling separation, feeling a lot of pain. But when he came back, they were all very joyful. Like they'd come back to life again, basically. Verse 6, which doesn't have a purport. Due to anxieties and long separation, they all cried out of affection. King Yudhisthira then arranged to offer sitting accommodations and a reception. Okay, so, verse 7. After Vidura ate sumptuously and took sufficient rest, he was comfortably seated. Then the king began to speak to him, and all who were present there listened. And Srila Prabhupada makes some nice points in the purport that Yudhisthira, Yudhisthira is so intelligent. He's the son of Yamaraj, Dharmaraj. They say that Yamaraj's planet is Pluto, and the bright side facing the sun is where the pious people go to have it decided and to be prepared for a nice next birth. And the other side, the dark side, is where the people go, the sinful people go, to be prepared for, some really horrible birth next time. And you may have noticed in the purport there, when it came to talking about Kunti, Prita, that when it came to how his father was Yamaraj, did you notice? The name was given as Dharmaraj. Yeah. Because Yamaraj has these two names, Yamaraj, Dharmaraj. And he's known as Yamaraj generally in regard to his dealings with sinful people. It's the Lord of Death, and it's all just, it's not nice at all. But Dharmaraj means the king of religion, and he's known by that name in terms of dealings with pious people, because pious people also, they go to his planet to be prepared for their next birth. But then he's referred to often as Dharmaraj and not just Yamaraj. So, okay. So Prabhupada's first point here in the purport is that Yudhisthira, is highly qualified in all types of ways. So he's expert at receiving people too. Yeah. We are not so much. But we're working on it. Because now we've got sweets. We've got prasadam to give. It's a step up from what we used to be like. But Yudhisthira was super expert. So what happened with Vidura, I think it's explained here in the purport. What happened with Vidura was that, he made all arrangements, of course. Expert in reception even in the case of his family members. You know, family members, you might think if they drop in, it's like, oh, it's you again, sort of thing, and not like a special guest. Stand to attention, provide all facility. But he was expert with all people, receiving them properly. So Vidura was well received. Then he took a bath, and then he was given sumptuous prasadam. We give everyone a sumptuous sweet. Yeah. So he was given a sumptuous dinner and then rest. Then when he'd finished resting, he was given a comfortable place to sit, and then the king, Yudhisthira, started talking with him. Again, very appropriately. Yeah. And Srila Prabhupada makes, it's really an important point, that this is how you receive a dear friend or even an enemy. According to Indian tradition, in Indian moral codes, even an enemy who visits should be received so nicely, just like a relative. Yeah. So the person forgets that we're enemies. And at least the first, I'm not sure how many days, but first, before the Battle of Kurukshetra sort of descended into just madness and just, fighting 24 hours, for some days they followed the normal Kshatriya codes. As soon as the sun sets, fighting stops at that instant. Yeah, even if you're in some crucial part of some fighting with some member of the opposition, but whatever, stop. And then they would visit each other in the evenings and have dinner and, yeah, like friends. This is culture. This is culture. So, yeah. So if even an enemy is to be treated like that, then what to speak of a dear family member like Vidura? Okay, so we go on to verse 8, and this is now Maharaj Parikshit begins a conversation, basically, discussion with Vidura. Maharaj Yudhisthira said, "My uncle, do you remember how you always protected us, along with our mother, from all sorts of calamities? Your partiality, like the wings of a bird, saved us from poisoning and arson." And my uncle, what word does he use for uncle? Just interested to see if it's there. Not exactly. It's just understood that he addresses him as my uncle. It's all part of being nice and respectful. So, yes, Srila Prabhupada gives fairly an extensive purport here. And Yudhisthira has glorified and appreciated Vidura for Vidura's kindness to the Pandavas when they were children, when their father just passed away. He protected them from danger. Him and, Prabhupada makes the point, him and Bhishma. Bhishma and Vidura is addressed here as Mahatma Vidura. So Vidura was a member. He was living in not such nice quarters, but every day he was there in the palace, generally. Every day he was there, and he was just part of the scene in the palace. Although Duryodhana would insult him from time to time. Prabhupada talks about that shortly. Yeah, so there was all these intrigues going on. Dhritarashtra was not really like the brain behind the abuses, or not even just abuses, but the attempts to kill the Pandavas. Duryodhana was behind, but Dhritarashtra, he knew about it, he didn't stop Duryodhana. Prabhupada makes the point that Dhritarashtra was equally careful for the minor children of Maharaj Pandu. He actually did help to look after them. But gradually, because they're little at that stage, Duryodhana, Dushasana, they're all the same age as the Pandavas. So at that point, Duryodhana, Dushasana, they're more or less the same age as the Pandavas. But as they get a bit older, then Duryodhana particularly, he was the senior son. He understood, my father is ruling just for the time being till Yudhisthira is old enough, but actually we don't want to hand it over to Yudhisthira. We want to retain the rulership. So then all the intrigues started when they were like young adults. So in different ways, Prabhupada says, before the Battle of Kurukshetra, Dhritarashtra's policy, well, it was really Duryodhana's policy, but Dhritarashtra was quite happy about it, was peaceful annihilation, if that's possible, peacefully annihilate someone. Peaceful annihilation of the Pandavas. So, they built a house of lac, that's one thing which is referred to here. Lac being highly flammable, but solid, so they built a house out of it, because it's solid enough. And the idea was one night to set the house alight, and because it's highly flammable, the whole house would just go up, just like that. But Vidura warned the Pandavas, and they escaped. Yeah. So, right. And only Vidura knew the Pandavas had escaped at that point. Shortly after, it became clear that the Pandavas had escaped. But Srila Prabhupada says towards the end of the purport that they thought the Pandavas were dead, and so they performed a funeral for the Pandavas. They thought they'd all been burnt to ashes, so, there are no dead bodies, but they just do a funeral ceremony. And Prabhupada says that the Kauravas were so certain of the death of the Pandavas that Dhritarashtra performed the last rites of death for the Pandavas with great cheerfulness. As he thought, they're out of the way, great. Now my sons will rule. So Vidura all along didn't like this at all, and he would actively participate in protecting the Pandavas. And he would chastise Dhritarashtra. How can you allow Duryodhana particularly to do these things? It's not right. So in the end, as we mentioned, I think it must have been last night or so, Duryodhana kicked Vidura out of the palace. And Vidura just went on pilgrimage and met Maitreya, got educated further spiritually by Maitreya. Now he's just coming back. Okay, so that's verse 8. Verse 9. Yudhisthira is now, Yudhisthira he's glorifying him, and now he's really questioning. And this, at least verse 9 is, he's questioning. While traveling on the surface of the earth, how did you maintain your livelihood? At which holy places and pilgrimage sites did you render service? Yeah. So Vidura went, he was happy to go. He took it as Krishna's mercy when he got kicked out, to get out of all the intrigues and all the unpleasantness. And he was being insulted also. Son of a Sudra. Yeah. And Prabhupada makes a point that sometimes between the grandmother and the grandson, the grandchildren, sometimes some funny talks can take place. In this case, she was a Sudra. She was a maidservant. So she's a Sudra. So to make a joke about her being a Sudrani, female Sudra, Prabhupada's saying that, these things may happen, but Prabhupada makes the point that Vidura took it as an insult, which is what it was intended for. Right, but he felt that it's just the right opportunity to take vanaprastha, so he left on pilgrimage. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Maharaj Yudhisthira was inquisitive to learn whether Vidura maintained himself by the mercy of the free kitchen houses, the chatras. Is that term used? I don't think it's used, but anyway, not exactly. I've taken prasadam in such a place before. And, I mentioned actually a little while ago that what they do, they provide prasadam or food, vegetarian, proper vegetarian, no onions, no garlic, for the pilgrims in these free kitchen houses. But in order to what would you say, ensure basically that the people, extremely poor people, don't eat too much, which would be expensive because they're giving it free. They make the sabji so hot, so hot. They're almost deadly. And we had that, I tell you what, it was so hot. With rice. Yeah, just cheap rice, gosh. as they say, cheapest and best. Just the cheapest rice you can get your hands on. And you take, a handful of rice and that much sabji, and it's too hot. It's just too hot. Okay, anyway, that's a little cultural point, by the way. Verse 10. My Lord, and this is a really nice verse, which Prabhupada quotes from time to time. My Lord, devotees like your good self are verily holy places personified. Because you carry the personality of Godhead within your heart, you turn all places into places of pilgrimage. So, Srila Prabhupada makes the point, the Lord's everywhere. Of course, the Lord's everywhere. At least by his energies, just as electricity is everywhere. The electricity is everywhere. Within this room, there's electricity. So, and of course, the Lord's within every atom also. So he's really everywhere. So a great devotee, pure devotee like Vidura, he can see that. The Lord's omnipresence is perceived and manifested by his unalloyed devotees like Vidura. Just as electricity is manifested in an electric bulb. So such advanced devotees, they always feel the presence of the Lord, and they're such people that they make the holy places more holy. In fact, without the holy people, the holy places in due course become deteriorated. They really do. Because the materialists move in. And popular holy place, many people, pious people, and the materialists move in and try to collect donations and sell things. I remember the first time we went to Tirupati, whenever it was, maybe it was 91, I think. We went, and all over Tirupati, it's a town surrounding the temple, and all around this town, you get street traders selling this rubbish. Like, how's this? A little aeroplane, and you push it along, and it makes the propeller turn in a place of pilgrimage. And, balloons. Oh my gosh. And all sorts of things. Little plastic toys, plastic motor cars. It's got nothing to do with the place of pilgrimage. Fortunately, they've cleaned up the act to some degree now. It's nowhere near as bad as it was, but it was really bad. Such a terrible embarrassment. And it's because of the lack of holy people, saintly people, preachers. So Prabhupada makes the point here in the purport that what really makes the holy place special, really in the long run, is the presence of the advanced devotees there. And if you associate with them, hear from them, then you'll get the benefit of preparing for going back to Godhead. yeah, so that's really a very important point. And these devotees, Prabhupada says, where does he say it? Anyway, he says it somewhere. Oh yeah. That these devotees, advanced devotees, who are at these holy places and who preach to people and don't just try to get money from them, Prabhupada says they're in the actual service of the Lord, specifically by the process of hearing and chanting. And yeah, they hear from authorities and then repeat those glories that they've heard from authorities. And then Prabhupada gives the example of Vyas hearing from Narada, then he chanted in the form of writing. Then Shukadev heard from Vyas, he spoke to Maharaj Parikshit, and of course Sutta was there, and Sutta is now, right now, he's heard from Shukadev at the same time as Parikshit did, and now he's chanting to the sages of Naimisharanya. And like this, pure devotees turn any place into a place of pilgrimage. Any place. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, such pure devotees are able to rectify the polluted atmosphere of any place, and what to speak of a holy place rendered unholy by the questionable actions of interested persons who try to adopt a professional life at the cost of the reputation of a holy place. You know, even like, particularly Varshana. Any of you are familiar with Varshana? They just don't understand. I mean, the Pandavas who just harass for money. They just don't understand that they're giving the place a reputation. And I've had people, Indian people, I was on a flight somewhere, quite some, maybe 10 years ago or so. I was on a flight, and sitting next to me was some business type person. And we started talking, he started talking about Varshana. He had just been there, and he was fried that they harass people for money. And then I said, yeah, and you know, it's really, the standards have gone down. There's a lot of meat eating. And he said, the meat eating doesn't matter, but this harassing for money, that's really bad. Okay. So, yeah. So where are we? We're at verse 11 or... Yes, sorry, we're at verse 11. My uncle, you must have visited Dwaraka. In that holy place are our friends and well-wishers, the descendants of Yadu, who are always wrapped in the service of the Lord Sri Krishna. You might have seen them or heard about them. Are they all living happily in their abodes? Well, what Yudhisthira doesn't know, because he's not connected with WhatsApp, or he's not even on email, and neither Instagram nor Twitter or anything like that. He doesn't know that the Yadu dynasty has been wiped out, or at least the great majority of the men have all killed each other. Yeah, that we'll read about in regards to verse 11 specifically. But here he's asking, Yudhisthira's asking, No, you must have gone, you went on pilgrimage, you went all over for a long time. You must have gone to Dwaraka. So how are those, our dear friends and well-wishers, the Yadu dynasty, how are they doing? They're always so Krishna conscious. Are they happy? Yeah. And the Yadus, or those who are Krishna conscious, they're addressed or referred to in the verse itself as Krishna Devata. And Prabhupada notes the point at the beginning of the purport, that the particular word Krishna Devata, which means those who are always wrapped in the service of Lord Krishna, is significant. Because the Yadus in Dwaraka and the Pandavas in Hastinapur, they're always wrapped in thought of Krishna and service. And Vidura also. Vidura left home for that purpose. Yeah. So it's interesting. Prabhupada makes, it's a little subtle point, but it's a very important point, that Vidura left home and went to places of pilgrimage. So he's Krishna Devata. He's wrapped in thought of Krishna and wrapped in service. The Pandavas stayed at home, and they're also Krishna Devata, because they're wrapped in thought of and service to Krishna at home, no less than Vidura is while he's traveling around on pilgrimage. So Prabhupada says, thus there is no difference in their pure devotional qualities, either remaining at home or leaving home. The real qualification of a pure devotee is to become wrapped in thought of Krishna. Favorably. And Prabhupada does then make the point that certain people like Kamsa, Shishupal, Jarasandha, they were also wrapped in thought of Krishna, but unfavorably. So therefore they're not Krishna Devata. Yeah. So therefore Kamsa, Shishupal are not on the same level as Vidura or the Pandavas or the Yadus. And so Yudhisthira, he was also like that, wrapped in thought of the Lord and his devotees. Otherwise he wouldn't have asked about them. So Yudhisthira's on the same level as Vidura, even though he's the king. Verse 12, thus being questioned by Maharaj Yudhisthira, Mahatma Vidura gradually described everything he had personally experienced, except news of the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty. Yes. And there's no purport there. But the same point is addressed in verse 13. So, verse 13, compassionate Mahatma Vidura could not stand to see the Pandavas distressed at any time. Therefore he didn't disclose this unpalatable and unbearable incident, because calamities come of their own accord. I think we mentioned this last night or the night before when we were reading the verses, that you don't need, unless there's some crucial, good, important reason for telling people some bad news, you don't need to tell people, because they're going to find out anyway. And why should you be the one? For what reason? Unless it's critical I remember when Srila Prabhupada left this world, November the 14th that we found out on the 15th, 1977. And I was the one, we had several traveling book distribution parties in England. Yeah, I forget how many, but it was like several. And they would phone in every evening with their scores, every 15 minutes, for about an hour and a half or 2 hours. The parties would call in from call boxes, public telephones, because believe it or not, devotees, cell phones didn't exist. Can you believe it? There was life before cell phones. But they call in, and I was the one who had to tell them, Prabhupada's left this world. You got to come back to the temple. So they all came back the next day. And there was a big program in the temple, sure. Yeah, but otherwise, in general, you don't need to tell. It's a favorite thing of like serious gossipers. If there's some bad news, the latest scandal, the latest, did you hear about someone did something stupid? Then the professional gossipers, they love to be the ones to spread the good word. But it's not nice. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that Niti Shastra, civic laws, one should not speak an unpalatable truth to cause distress to others. Distress comes upon us in its own way by the laws of nature. So you don't need to aggravate it by pushing it onto people. Yeah. For a compassionate soul like Vidura, especially in his dealings with the beloved Pandavas, it was almost impossible to disclose an unpalatable piece of news, like the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty. Therefore, he purposely refrained from it. Verse 14. Thus, Mahatma Vidura, being treated just like a godly person by his kinsman, remained there for a certain period just to rectify the mentality of his eldest brother, and in this way bring happiness to all the others. Yeah, rectify the mentality of his eldest brother, and this would make everyone happy if Dhritarashtra got straightened out. Okay, so, yeah, some interesting points in the purport. That when saintly people visit, they should be received like denizens of heaven. Because in those days, denizens of heaven would sometimes come. So saintly people have to be treated like that. Yeah. And so therefore, Vidura, who's a very saintly person and extremely dear to all of them, and he's really, he's played such a big part in the past in helping them. And he's, great saintly devotee on top of all of it. So Maharaj Yudhisthira therefore received Vidura in the manner of reception offered to the demigods. So Vidura, the next paragraph, was already, to my knowledge, he had not like officially taken sannyas, but Prabhupada says, he'd already adopted the renounced order of life. So therefore he didn't come in order to enjoy life in the big palace and be a celebrity in the palace. But what he came for, out of his mercy, he came to sort Dhritarashtra out. So he accepted the hospitality. That's important. When really like sincere householders who want to honor the renounced or more renounced devotees, then the more renounced devotees have to accept the hospitality. Obviously, particularly if it's devotee householders offering it. Yeah. So he did. I remember Giriraj Maharaj told me the story. He was with Prabhupada in those days, Bombay, and they were going in the evenings. I don't know if it was every evening, but it was pretty often, going to people's houses, very nice, devotees or very pious Hindus who were very wealthy and who would always offer them really good prasadam or food. And Giriraj Maharaj told me at one point he was trying to be austere and cut down on sweets. So the host himself, the actual owner of the place, was distributing rasgullas. And Maharaj was sitting next to Prabhupada, and Maharaj had one, and the host came around and offered a second one, and Maharaj refused. And Prabhupada said to Maharaj, "You can take another sweet to make an old man happy." So Maharaj took another sweet. Yeah, so Vidura accepted the hospitality. But actually he'd come to preach to Dhritarashtra, and that's what he's about to start doing just in a couple of verses. So, because Dhritarashtra was just in a pathetic state, he had tried or participated in a number of attempts to kill the Pandavas. Now he's living by their mercy, at their expense. It's pathetic. And what Prabhupada says, that, or maybe it's not right here, that it would have somewhere else, but anyway, we'll just see, that it would have been more honorable to die with his sons. So yeah, it's amazing. He's not ashamed to accept charity from these people, the Pandavas. So Vidura is just about to start preaching. He is really going to get into it too. So verse 15, let's see if we can finish this section. We might be able to, we might not too, but anyway. As long as Vidura played the part of a Sudra, being cursed by Manduka Muni, Aryama officiated at the post of Yamaraj to punish those who have committed sinful acts. Aryama, we mentioned last night, didn't we? we had a Bhagavad Gita, we could have a look and see. Could someone just do a search for Aryama in Bhagavad Gita chapter 10? You got it? Huh? 10:29. What does it say? No, just the translation.
Of the many Buddha lovers, I am Ananta, and among the Patiks, I am demigod Varuna. Of departed ancestors, I am Aryama.
Of departed ancestors, yeah. I'm Aryama. He deals with the Pitris. So Prabhupada talks about Vidura born from a Sudra mother, so he didn't get a share of the royal inheritance, royal property. So how could he preach? So Prabhupada says there are two reasons. There are two reasons why, two answers to the question, how could he, as a Sudra, preach to his brother who is a Kshatriya? So the first answer is, even though he had a Sudra birth, he was a fully educated renunciate. And Lord Chaitanya says that anyone who knows the science of Krishna consciousness can become a guru. And the second answer to the question, how could he as a Sudra or born a Sudra preach to someone who's higher in terms of Varna, is he's not actually a Sudra. He's Yamaraj. And Yamaraj is a Mahajan. He's not just a devotee or even a great devotee. He's one of the 12 Mahajans, the great authorities in Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada makes the point. He talks about Yamaraj and the cursing and, by Manduka Muni and all of that. But Prabhupada makes the point that normally Yamaraj has very little time to take leave from his responsible office of punishing the wrongdoers. And therefore, he doesn't get the opportunity to preach so much. So he was happy. He got to become a preacher. He wanted to preach, so it was actually the arrangement of the Lord that he got cursed. And Prabhupada makes the point that even sometimes the Lord plays like he's in a low position himself. Varaha was a pig. Of course, he's the Supreme Lord, but in the position of apparently at least in a body like a pig. So the Lord sometimes does this, and sometimes the devotees also. For what it's worth, I made an attempt once to enter the Jagannath Puri temple, and they came forward with their big sticks, and they would have used them, so we didn't go any further. But, there I am, and the leader of the Parikrama party, and the initiating spiritual master of a number of devotees on the Parikrama party. Those disciples can go into the Puri temple, but I can't. What can you do? It's because of the low birth. Haribol, such is life. In this material world. So then Prabhupada talks a little bit about Aryama. He's one of the 12 Adityas. Oh, and I've got it in my notes. Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, verse 29, of departed ancestors, I'm Aryama. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, there's also a planet of Pitas, or ancestors, presided over by Aryama, who represents Krishna. He's ruling over Pitri Loka. Alrighty. And, well, let's just read verse 16, because it's the last verse in this section. Having won his kingdom and observed the birth of one grandson, competent to continue the noble tradition of his family, Maharaj Yudhisthira reigned peacefully and enjoyed uncommon opulence in cooperation with his younger brothers, who were all expert administrators to the common people. So Prabhupada in the purport makes the point, both Yudhisthira and Arjuna, they were not happy to fight in the battle of Kurukshetra, but they had to out of duty. It was the will of the Lord. Yudhisthira was happy after the battle also. So, so the Lord's arrangement in different ways. So after the battle, there was no one to continue the line. Then Ashvatthama tried to kill Parikshit. Krishna saved Parikshit, so therefore, Prabhupada explains, now everything was settled. Yudhisthira felt some relief and, quote unquote, enjoyed the kingdom and everything, although not materially attracted. But now he's happy. Parikshit's born, he's competent to rule, so things are good. And that's the end of that section. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.